everybody. Peace and blessings be upon each and every one of you. It's such an honor to be here, my first time in Rhode Island. You know, I'll start with a story. I was just walking down the street, and an older white man came up to me. He's like, "That thing on your head, it makes you look beautiful." And I was like, "Thank you. No one's ever said anything like that to me. Give it up for the man." So, I consider myself a storytelling activist. And as a poet, I'm going to develop a little bit of a metaphor scheme for us to guide us through the lessons that I have today. A couple years ago, I was talking to a friend of mine, and it doesn't matter if you're in your 20s or your 50s, everybody has an answer to, if you had one superpower, what would it be? And so when he asked me this, I told him it would be to remove sadness from people. And he looked at me and asked, "Why would you do something like that? Why would you take away the most integral emotion that a person has in order to spare them whatever?" And I really had to stop and I had to think about this. The value of sadness. Now, we know all of the greatest artists from the beginning of time, be it Mozart or Van Gogh or your modern-day dubstep cool cats. They all have had spells of depression, we will call it. But their sadness is really where they manage to foster this creativity. And as a poet, I'm no different. It's said that we know more about space than we do our own oceans. And this is such a mind-boggling thing. I mean, empirically, we haven't discovered enough of space to qualify that statement necessarily. But we know about the solar systems, we know about the stars and the star screams and the black holes and the nebulas, and we're aware of the orbits and the constellations, right? And humans, we're naturally stargazers. We look up. And the stars, they offer this hope, this guidance, this sort of underground railroad map. Now, the oceans, every single day, scientists are discovering new freaky creatures that we've never heard anything even close to. Creatures that were created blind and dwell in the deep, dark depths that our own submarines haven't managed to reach yet. Now for the metaphor scheme. Stargazing, it's amazing, it's powerful, it's beautiful. We get to look up from our sanctuaries here, shackled by gravity and secure. And we get to admire the skies and hope and wish. And as for the oceans, there's so much pressure down there that if you go too deep, you will literally implode on yourself. For me, my stars are the Star-Spangled Banner. Ha. And my ocean, those deep, dark, scary depths, well, they come from my father's side of the bloodline, which is Syria. My mama's from Iowa. She's about as American as you can get. And my dad, he's from Syria. He came here in the early 80s and became a citizen of this country. And to be born into this dual household where you had meatloaf and hummus on the same table, you developed an excellent, excellent taste palette, but your heart also was forced to develop different realms of emotion that having only one side of the culture you couldn't necessarily have. On April 4th, 2017, we were in our Denver, Colorado home, and my father woke us up for the early morning prayer, Fajr. And usually when he gets crazy news out of Syria, he's usually intense and angry. Oh, they bombed this place today. They killed this journalist. My friend from college died. And there's a little bit of a frazzling. But this morning, my brown skin, deep voice, slightly accented Arab father was like a little boy. And he was shaking when he woke us up. And he said, they bombed my sister's house this morning. Anyone ever heard of WhatsApp? It's a messaging app that, you can quote me on this, every ethnic person and their mom has. This is a universal fact. We're sitting there on WhatsApp, and we're getting the updates. Now, there were times in Syria where the electricity would be shut off. My family would not have food, water, medical access. They had nothing, but they had Wi-Fi. And sometimes that's what we would prefer for them. Because when you don't know whether someone's safe, the imagination goes into some scary oceanic depths about the possibilities. Well, this morning, we were under the impression that it was my cousin who was texting us on WhatsApp. It was her phone number. And we found out it was picked up from the rubble, and one of the neighbors was the one updating us. And we were sitting there. After we prayed, you can imagine how long and intense that prayer was. We're sitting on the floor reading the text messages, and the first body to be pulled out was my aunt, my father's sister. And there's a moment. Every human has this moment. Whether you are dealing with a loved one who's dying from cancer, or your house is about to be foreclosed, or the plane is about to crash, whatever it is, every human has this moment where you are confronted with the reality of the situation, and you have to face it. And we sat there. The tears hadn't even developed at this point, looking at the message saying my father's sister's body was the first to be pulled out of the rubble. And it's crazy because after that, they just kept listing the names of the bodies. Nisreen, Salam. Kids I used to play with on my grandmother's farm, and you see their names in the form of an obituary in a WhatsApp text message. And here we are in our comfortable Denver, Colorado. I don't even know what a bomb really sounds like. According to the refugees, the closest thing to it is 4th of July fireworks. By the end of the day, 11 members of my family were killed. And I am including the 2 babies inside of the bellies of my 2 pregnant cousins. That's a lot of loss for one bombing. Now, at this point, these weren't the first members of our family that we lost. I lost one of my cousins. He was 25 years old. He needed 1 shot of insulin when he fell into a diabetic coma. But because of the siege enforced by the Assad regime, they were not able to receive the medical access, so he died in his mother's lap. My father's second cousin, she was 13 years old, and this was before the conflict became armed. The family was sitting in their farm eating breakfast, and the little girl was sniped in the back of her head, and the mother was shot in the face, and the 2 men were detained. But what happened to my aunt, this was the first time that the war had literally come and knocked on our door. We have all this extended family members, and dying from starvation or a diabetic coma, it's much different than a bombing. Now, as hard as it was for my father, the real challenge was the husband of my aunt. This man lost his wife, he lost his mother. He lost 3 of his daughters, his sister. He lost a bunch of grandchildren and a daughter-in-law. And my father reached out to him a few months later, It's so challenging to empathize with someone like that because there's literally no experience in our star-spangled skylights that equate to the same level as losing your entire family in one bombing. So my dad asked what anyone would ask. How's it going? And the man said, Alhamdulillah, which means praise God. It's something you say whether you eat delicious dessert or whether you fail a test or whatever it is. Alhamdulillah, I wasn't chosen to go with them. And he just kept saying this over and over again. The sadness that this man has felt. It's impossible to really, really feel those depths. Not every submarine can go that deep into the depths and still survive. Sadness is the thing that testifies to human resilience. Poverty and loss and starvation, all of those things, those are real human struggles, but it's the human reality of loss and grief and sadness that make those experiences so challenging for the human being. We are not apathetic creatures. We feel things in our hearts. And as I look through the stories of my family in Syria, the empathy that we feel for them, and I'm not talking about taking a walk in their shoes. It's impossible to do that, especially when half these refugee kids don't even have shoes. Empathy is cutting out your heart and placing it in someone else's chest. That's what empathy is. It forces you to just scratch the surface of some of these deaths and these depths and these heartaches. Because when you can do that, the resilience doesn't come from staying in the darkness. It comes from going back up to the shores and being able to look back at the stars and admire them despite everything you just saw. Sadness is how I know human beings have survived the most challenging and horrifying of things. It's how I know the art is the most beautiful when you can describe something from the dungeons and compare it to a flag with some stars on it. Human beings are so incredible, and I call myself a storytelling activist because when I tell my story, for those who are truly listening, they're cutting open their chest and they're putting it into the chest of the one telling the story. Whether it's my own story or the story of my aunt's husband, or it doesn't really matter. When we listen, we feel, and empathy is the key to storytelling. When we don't have empathy, when we don't understand how dark the reality of someone else can be, we have this tendency to be like, we'll get over it. Like, come on, look at the stars. Things are bright. Things are going to be okay. Our optimism can't always apply in places that are far beyond anywhere we've ever visited. They say that's why we've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. We're supposed to do double the listening than the speaking. And as someone who blabbers on stage for a living, that's kind of hard sometimes. But the truth is, even if we get uncomfortable, even if the person talking offends us, I would know. By listening, this discomfort, these feelings of being offended, these are what humble us. And when I say humble, I'm still going to jump in on that metaphor scheme. They allow us to swim deep into places that we've never necessarily gone. And we get to look around. And we get to float back up to where we are safe. Storytelling is so profound because I've had people who've come up to me, who you wouldn't expect come up to me and shake my hand. Now, I had this one guy after a poetry event. All my poetry was about ISIS, right? As a Muslim, I think it's a very important topic to discuss. And this man walked up to me. He was a big, middle-aged white man. And he said, you know, I voted for President Donald Trump, but I swear next election I'm voting for you. I was like, yeah, buddy. Like, give me a few years, boss. Maybe we'll talk about it. Right? That's exciting. But the thing is, I wasn't sitting there talking about politics. I wasn't talking about my opinion on the matter. I wasn't talking about any of that stuff. I was literally telling the story of a people in another continent, victimized and who victimize. And this guy was drawn to tell me this, and he didn't have to. We weren't even having that type of conversation. But when you tell stories, and when they are sincere, and you're willing to really go into the depths of what is scary, where all those freaky dragonfish, like off the coast of Japan, are dwelling, and you're not afraid to tell that reality from a human perspective, not a witty, self-congratulatory political perspective, right? People will listen. What my aunt's family went through, the ones who survived, they know what grief is. But you know who else knows what grief is? The parents of the children who were shot and killed in Parkland, Florida during the high school shooting that happened. The parents of Sandy Hook elementary school students. The families of the victims in the Las Vegas shooting. The families from Hurricane Harvey. The families who are about to experience this in North Carolina and South Carolina. They all know what grief is. And shoot, let's go put it down a little more. We've all lost someone. My grandmother died in a hospital, safely, on a lot of drugs, but she was funny. But she died, and my family had to deal with that. But that grief, that's the passageway. And some people have delved deeper and deeper than others on the spectrum, but the reality is, in the words of Brother Ali, can you tell me what language do you laugh in? The human reaction is smiles and cries. What language are the tears when they're falling from your eyes? Empathy is the key strategy because everybody knows it. Not everyone's going to know XYZ industrial complex. Not everyone's going to know the names of the policies affecting people of color or immigrants. Not everyone's going to know these jargons that we have in our own realms of activism, but everyone is going to know what sadness is. And everyone's going to know what loss is. And everyone's going to know what joy is and hope. That's why I say, listen. Let someone carry you down to the depths of the oceans. And when you come out and it's time for you to share your own story, you will be able to take people on a journey that some submarines have not reached. And then you'll get to compare them to the stars. My name means hope in Arabic. And for someone who's endured quite a bit of darkness in her life, I think my parents were playing a funny joke, like, you have no choice but to be hopeful by the end of the night. I appreciate you all listening to me. Peace be with you. Have a good night.